My name is Emily Warren. I'm 32, and right now I'm standing in the Grand Lounge of Alpine Creek Resort, where my family has vacationed every winter for over a decade, as if it's a tradition stitched into our bloodline. Behind me, a massive stone fireplace crackles with warmth. Around me, laughter swirls through the air glasses clink, and the scent of expensive Pinot Noir mixes with wood smoke and roasted lamb. No one sees me. Or rather, they see me, but not really. My cousin Madison just waved me over, not to say hi, not to ask how I've been, but to ask if I could grab a few more napkins from the dessert table. I'm wearing a black wool coat and leather boots, but I guess something about me still reads staff. I didn't correct her. I smiled, nodded, and walked toward the table like I belonged in the background. I've gotten good at disappearing. To them, I'm still the quiet one. The one who works in engineering or maybe tech or something with numbers. No one ever bothers to ask. They know Claire, of course, my older sister, the golden child, the lawyer with a corner office and a perfectly filtered life on Instagram. They know what car she drives, what wine she likes, where she just got back from Bali this time. Her every opinion is met with nods and admiration. Me, I built a multi-million-dollar structural analytics company from scratch, led projects that rerouted urban transportation in 3 cities, and filed 5 patents before I turned 30. But no one brings that up at dinner. That's okay, or at least that's what I told myself. For years. I sip from a paper cup of coffee, lukewarm, too sweet, and look around the room. Claire's by the fireplace, surrounded by our aunts and uncles, retelling a story she's told at least 5 times, each version slightly more dramatic. Mom's perched on a chaise nearby, beaming with pride, her manicured fingers wrapped around a crystal glass. They love this place. Every year, same cabins, same catered meals, same legacy bookings. It's become their winter castle, a symbol of who we are, or who they think we are. They never noticed when I stopped showing up to brunches, or when I started skipping the group hikes, or when I stayed behind in the cabin for hours pretending to nap just to escape the noise. They noticed when the perks changed, though, when the complimentary bottle of wine was swapped for sparkling cider, when their usual cabin wasn't available, when their preferred guest discount quietly vanished. They blamed the new management, complained about the impersonal policies, and talked about how this place has lost its soul. They have no idea. The truth is, they're not just guests anymore. Not really. And I'm not just standing in this room tonight to refill napkins or dodge conversations. I'm here because I approved the winter season schedule, because the reservation system they grumbled about, I designed it, because this year I'm not one of the invisible. I'm the owner. Well, technically the controlling partner of the firm that purchased this resort 6 months ago. They'll find out tomorrow. And no, I'm not planning some grand reveal. No mic drop, no stage. I won't even be in the room. I want the silence to hit first. The confusion, the shift. I want them to sit with the realization before I say a single word. But for now, I'll stand here quietly still holding this coffee, watching the people who never really saw me enjoy one last night in a world they think they understand. Because tomorrow everything changes. They always assumed I was content on the sidelines. Maybe because I never raised my voice, never interrupted their stories, never demanded space. They mistook silence for smallness. What they don't understand is that silence can be a shield. And in my case, it's also been a strategy. I've never fit into the Warren family mold. Not like Claire. She was built for it, polished, charming, performative in all the right ways. She could light up a room with just a smile, and when she talked, people leaned in, not because they cared what she was saying, but because she made it feel like they should. She's good at that. Growing up, Claire was the star. Mom would introduce her as my brilliant daughter, and me as the quiet one, but very sweet. If Claire forgot something, it was she's so busy these days. If I forgot something, it was maybe try being a bit more present, Emily. It wasn't always cruel. Sometimes that's what made it worse. It was the subtle glances, the low expectations, the backhanded compliments. Like the time I landed my first major contract, helping design the structural blueprint for a high-rise in Seattle. I told my mom over dinner. She nodded, smiled tightly, and asked if I'd remembered to RSVP to Claire's gallery opening. She never even asked what the building was for, or when my company was featured in a tech spotlight magazine. Claire skimmed the article and said, "This is great. You've always been so organized." Organized, like I'd alphabetized a spice rack not found at a firm. I started attending family gatherings less frequently after that. Not out of spite, just necessity. When you're constantly made to feel peripheral, you start protecting your center. Still, I showed up this year, partly out of habit, partly to see if anything had changed. It hadn't. The same inside jokes I was never part of, the same dismissive nods when I spoke up, the same feeling that I could vanish from the room and no one would notice until dessert. I watched Claire flip her hair and tell a story about how she almost bought a winery last fall. Everyone laughed like she was a sitcom. I watched my mom beam, like Claire had just solved climate change. I walked outside for air. The snow had started falling soft and steady, settling into the trees like it belonged there. No one followed me. Sometimes I wonder if they even know who I am. Not just the career or the investments, but the person. The woman who spent nights in graduate labs, who learned how to read contracts in legalese, who made 1,000 small, quiet decisions to build something no one ever believed she could. That woman doesn't need their validation. But the girl I used to be, she still remembers what it felt like to be overlooked, to try so hard to belong and still be invisible. I stayed outside a little longer than I meant to. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't really care. Through the frosted window, I could see my family laughing, lit by the golden glow of the lodge chandelier. They looked like a holiday card. Perfect. Untouchable. I took one more breath and went back inside. Tomorrow, they'll know the truth. But tonight, I'll let them enjoy their illusion just a little longer. There's something about being useful that becomes a trap, especially in families like mine, where expectations don't need to be spoken out loud, they just float in the air, heavy and constant like mountain fog. You learn your role early. You either shine or you serve. Claire shined. I served. It started small. I was the one who set the table before dinner, who helped clean up without being asked, who remembered everyone's coffee orders, and packed extra gloves before ski trips. No one assigned me these things. I just did them. Maybe I thought it would help me belong. Maybe I thought it would make them see me. All it did was cement my place as the helper. That's how they still treat me. Last year during the family's annual holiday brunch, my cousin's wife forgot the sweet potato casserole she'd promised to bring. Mom turned to me mid-bite and said, "Emily, would you mind throwing something together in the kitchen?" Not, "Can we fix this?" Not, "Does anyone have ideas?" Just straight to me. Like I was the safety net, the silent support staff. I made the casserole. Of course I did. I even garnished it with rosemary and toasted pecans. Everyone raved about it. Claire said it tasted like those trendy bistros in Napa. No one asked how I whipped it up so fast. No one thanked me afterward. That's the pattern. I show up, I fix things, and I fade back into the wallpaper. A few years ago, when Dad slipped on the ice and broke his wrist, I was the one who drove him to urgent care. Claire had a photo shoot scheduled. Mom was coordinating the insurance paperwork. I waited 6 hours in a freezing lobby with a vending machine dinner and a Wi-Fi signal that barely reached the hallway. When we got home, Claire asked if I could help her wrap her gifts for a friend's engagement party. She didn't even ask how Dad was doing. I said yes, because that's what I did. Over time, I got used to it, the expectation that I'd always be the reliable one, the one who kept the peace, who remembered the logistics, who filled in the gaps so everyone else could look like they had it all together. It didn't matter that I had my own work deadlines, that I ran a company with 12 employees, that I was managing 6-figure contracts while also managing the family spreadsheet for holiday travel. No one ever thought to ask how I was holding up. Not once. When I stopped offering, they noticed, but not in the way I hoped. They didn't ask if something was wrong. They just looked inconvenienced, as if my boundaries were a betrayal. I remember one conversation with Mom a couple winters ago after I turned down helping plan Claire's 30th birthday trip. I was slammed with client work and politely declined. Mom said, "I just thought you cared more. You've always been the thoughtful one." She didn't mean it as a compliment. It was a guilt dagger wrapped in nostalgia. I didn't argue. I just nodded. And later that night, I opened my laptop and worked until 2 a.m., because my clients respected my time more than my own mother did. That's when it started to shift something in me. The quiet resentment, the weariness of always being the one who gave while others took. I didn't have a name for it then, but now I do. It was the beginning of my exit. Not a dramatic one, not with slammed doors or shouted accusations, just a slow, deliberate walk toward something I could finally call mine. There's one moment I still think about more often than I'd like to admit. It was 3 years ago my mom had just retired from her executive role at a regional bank. Claire and I decided we'd throw her a surprise party at the resort. Well, I decided. Claire agreed so long as I handled the logistics, which of course meant everything. I booked the venue coordinated. The caterers designed the invitations, made the guest list called every extended family member, handled the decorations, the playlist, the seating charts down to printing little place cards with gold foil letters. I spent weekends on spreadsheets and evenings on vendor calls. Claire showed up the morning of, wearing a designer dress and holding a small bouquet she bought on the way up. During the party, everything went flawlessly. People toasted, music played, Mom smiled, that proud, distant smile she saves for company. The food was excellent, the lighting perfect. I even arranged for a memory reel of her career milestones to play after dessert. People cried. Then Claire stood up to give a toast. She thanked everyone for coming, thanked the guests who flew in, thanked the resort manager, thanked the florist. And then she said I couldn't have done any of this without my amazing support system, my husband, our cousins, and of course Mom for being such an inspiration. She never mentioned my name, not once. I was standing 10 feet away holding a clipboard behind the cake table. No one noticed. No one looked at me. No one corrected her. And I just stood there smiling, nodding, pretending it didn't hurt like hell. After the toast, someone handed me a tray of wine glasses and asked if I could help reset for the cocktail hour. I said yes, because that's what I did. That's what they expected. That's who I was to them, an extra set of hands. The good daughter. The behind-the-scenes fixer. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the cabin kitchen, staring at a pile of leftover canapes and wondering how I had become so forgettable in my own family. I wasn't looking for a standing ovation. I wasn't asking for a spotlight. I just wanted to be seen, really seen. To be acknowledged not just as someone who showed up and cleaned up, but as someone who mattered. That moment marked something in me. Not a break, not yet, but a hairline fracture. A quiet realization that no matter how hard I worked, how perfect I made everything, how much of myself I poured into these people they'd never see, beyond the role they'd assigned me. It wasn't just about that party. It was about every event before it, every missed thank you, every backhanded compliment, every time I was praised for being reliable instead of recognized for being exceptional. I think deep down I'd held on to this naive hope that if I just did enough, if I gave enough, they'd finally let me in. But that night, sitting in that kitchen with silence ringing louder than applause ever could, I realized something important. I wasn't in the family photo. I was the one adjusting the tripod, and maybe it was time I stopped asking for a seat at their table. Maybe it was time I built my own. It's funny how the smallest remarks stay with you longer than the loudest arguments. My mother has never raised her voice at me, not once. She doesn't have to. Her tone is always calm, polite, clipped, just enough to carry weight without ever sounding angry. To outsiders, she seems gracious, refined. But to me, every sentence lands like a soft slap. "Emily, you've always been more practical," she told me once after Claire gave a speech at a charity gala. The implication wasn't lost on me. Claire was graceful. I was functional. Another time, I walked into the dining room in a brand new navy blue dress, professional, well-fitted, elegant in its simplicity. Mom looked me up and down and said, "Oh, I love how you never try too hard. It's refreshing." It took me a full minute to realize that wasn't a compliment, but the worst ones were always about Claire. "She just has that presence," Mom would say, as if I hadn't been standing in the same room. "Some people are born with it. It's not something you can learn." Claire never contradicted her, never told her to stop. She'd just smile, look a little embarrassed, and say Mom like it was too flattering to ignore. Even when she wasn't saying anything directly to me, my mother knew how to remind me where I stood. She'd send articles about how to dress for your body type to our group chat and tag only me. She once asked if I'd considered taking a public speaking course just to help with your confidence. I've spoken on industry panels, led executive briefings for city infrastructure boards. I don't need help with confidence. I need people to stop assuming I'm invisible unless I'm explaining something in bullet points. But with my family, it was always the same. Claire was the charm and I was the checklist. They didn't ask about my business unless it involved a favor. They didn't ask about my life unless something had gone wrong. When I bought my first investment property, a boutique hotel in Portland, my mom blinked and said, "Oh, is that a safe choice? That seems very risky for someone like you." Someone like me. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I already knew. Someone quiet. Someone plain. Someone who didn't carry herself like Claire did. That's how she put it once when she thought I wasn't listening. "She's kind," Mom said on the phone with an aunt. Reliable, but she just doesn't carry herself with that same polish. You can tell. I don't think she meant to be cruel. That's what made it worse. Because that's how it always was. Little chips, soft digs, subtle downgrades that I wasn't supposed to take personally. But I did. Of course I did. Anyone would. You can only be told who you're not for so long before you start wondering who you really are. I tried to compensate. I'd bring wine to family dinners, offer to help plan events, drive hours out of my way to attend gatherings I wasn't even part of. I thought maybe if I just kept showing up, kept smiling, kept offering. But nothing ever changed. There was always a comment, a tone, a comparison. I wasn't angry, at least not then. I was tired. Deeply emotionally tired. Tired of being the background. Tired of being supportive while everyone else was celebrated. And tired of waiting for someone else to decide I was worthy of attention. That's when I stopped trying to earn it. Not out of defiance, but self-preservation. I didn't stop caring. I just stopped begging. There's this moment in every family where you realize, no matter how much you give, some people will only ever love the version of you that makes them feel comfortable. And I had made everyone comfortable for far too long. I kept my success, muted my opinions polite, my wardrobe neutral. I made myself easy to overlook because somewhere along the way, I believed that was the price of being accepted. And I kept hoping. Even after the retirement party, even after the countless ignored milestones, I still hoped that just maybe one year I'd walk into this resort and they'd see me. Not the helper, not the errand runner, not the girl with the clipboard, but me. A whole real person. It's a dangerous kind of hope, the kind that lingers even when reality keeps proving it wrong. I remember one Christmas morning here 2 years ago. I'd brought personalized gifts for everyone, thoughtful, specific, beautifully wrapped. I'd stayed up late designing each package with a handwritten note. Claire gave everyone gift cards in matching envelopes. They raved about hers for hours. So convenient. You're always thinking ahead. Such great presentation. When they opened mine, there was a brief, polite silence, and then someone said, "Oh wow, this must have taken a lot of time." As if that was a flaw. Mom smiled tightly and said, "You're always so meticulous." That word again. Meticulous. Neat. Efficient. Never impressive. Never inspiring. Just useful. I don't remember what I said. Probably nothing. I just folded the discarded ribbons into a neat pile and offered to make more coffee. That was the last time I brought gifts. I started traveling more after that. Longer work trips, conferences, site inspections. At first I told myself it was for business growth, and it was. But it was also easier to be away, to exist in places where my title meant something, where people introduced me by what I'd built, not who I was related to. At work, I was the founder, the decision maker, the woman who got things done. At home, I was just Emily, the one who remembered to bring extra toothpaste and paid the cleaning deposit in advance, and took the family photo with a steady hand, only to be cropped out of the frame. The irony is, I never really wanted to be the center of attention. I didn't need applause. I just wanted respect, recognition, maybe even a little warmth that wasn't conditional on what I could do for them, but it never came. Eventually, I stopped waiting. I stopped volunteering, stopped responding right away in the family group chat, stopped explaining my schedule or apologizing for not being available. They noticed, but only enough to comment on how distant I'd become. No one asked why, not once. It was as if their image of me was more real to them than the person I'd become. And that image didn't include ambition or boundaries or anger. It included casseroles and car rides and showing up on time with a smile. I didn't correct them. What would have been the point? They had their version of me, but I was starting to build my own. One meeting at a time, one late-night spreadsheet at a time, one real estate proposal at a time. It started as a whisper, an idea, a question I asked myself in the quiet. What if I stopped shrinking? What if I stopped letting them define the room? What if I owned it? It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of crisp, snow-dusted day that resorts like Alpine Creek dream about. Fresh powder on the trees, fire pits glowing along the courtyard, luxury SUVs lined up like a ski-themed photo shoot. Inside the lounge, the family had gathered for what Claire cheerfully labeled an informal fireside chat, which was really just a chance for her to hold court in front of the relatives. She'd chosen the biggest armchair, flanked by Aunt Ruth and Cousin Madison, both holding wine glasses and hanging on her every word. I sat by the windows pretending to scroll through emails on my phone, though I wasn't reading a thing. "And here's the exciting part," Claire said, her voice lifting with that performative charm she'd perfected years ago. "I've actually been in touch with a development group that's planning to buy a resort property in Aspen." But she paused for effect. I told them I might hold off. "Hold off?" Uncle Gerald asked, leaning in. Claire beamed. "Because I've been thinking, what if we just bought this place?" The room erupted in reactions, gasps, chatter, impressed chuckles. Claire looked positively glowing under the praise. "I mean, think about it," she continued, crossing one leg over the other like a CEO in a press shoot. "We practically live here every winter. It's basically tradition. And the way things have been managed lately, the discount policy, the booking errors, clearly they could use someone who understands family legacy." Someone handed her a second glass of wine. My mother actually clapped. "You've always had that business instinct," she said proudly. No one looked at me. I didn't expect them to. I sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the reflection of the fireplace in the window, fingers curled loosely around my phone. My heart didn't pound. My breath didn't hitch. I just listened quietly, closely, as my sister talked about buying the very resort I had already owned for almost 6 months. It was surreal, like watching someone announce plans to move into your house while you're sitting at the kitchen table. Claire kept going now, sketching a vision of what she'd change, modernize the spa, upgrade the website, maybe even rename it. "Warren Lodge," she mused aloud, and everyone laughed like it was a brilliant idea. My mother practically melted with delight. "Darling, that's perfect. You know how to elevate things." I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not even jealousy, just a click. A door closing softly but firmly. The realization that this family would always be willing to bet on Claire's potential, even when I was sitting on proven results. They praised her for a hypothetical purchase. I had done it, and still I was invisible. That was the moment I stopped wondering if they'd ever change. It wasn't dramatic. There was no scene, just a private decision made in a public room. I stood up, excused myself quietly, and walked out into the cold. Snowflakes drifted through the pine trees, soft and slow, landing gently on my coat. I took a long breath, pulled out my phone, and opened a message thread labeled "Clear Pines Legal." Typed just 3 words. "Let's finalize everything." Because I wasn't interested in proving anything to them anymore. They could have their dreams and their plans and their lovely imagined future. I had reality and the deed. That night we had dinner in the resort's main dining room, a rustic space with vaulted ceilings and iron chandeliers, the kind of place where everything is wood-paneled and costs twice as much because of it. Everyone had dressed up. Mom wore a cranberry silk blouse and diamond earrings that hadn't seen daylight since Claire's law school graduation. Claire naturally looked like she'd stepped out of a holiday editorial, cashmere sweater, sleek wool skirt, and that smile she reserved for moments she could hold the entire room in her palm. Me, I wore a navy dress I'd owned for 5 years. Simple, sharp lines, nothing flashy. No one noticed. We were halfway through the appetizers when it happened. Our waiter brought a second basket of rolls and asked if we needed anything else. Before I could answer, Claire turned to me and said, "Could you grab a few more napkins? They keep forgetting them tonight." She said it so casually, like we were in our own kitchen, like I was supposed to get up and fetch things. A few people at the table chuckled, assuming it was some inside joke. Mom smiled without looking up. No one thought it was strange that I didn't even work there. I froze for just a second. Then I nodded and stood up, walked to the server's station at the back like I belonged there, picked up a stack of linen napkins, carried them back, set them down without a word. Claire didn't say thank you. Neither did anyone else. I sat back down and took a sip of my water, hands shaking slightly under the table. It wasn't the first time they'd treated me like the help. It probably wouldn't be the last. But something about that moment, so public, so thoughtless, lodged in my chest like a splinter. I wasn't angry, not the kind that boils. I was still, hollow. Like something inside me had finally stopped trying. For years I'd explained it away. They didn't mean harm. They didn't realize. They were just used to me being helpful, quiet, dependable. But the truth is, they did know, at least on some level, and they didn't care. Because in their eyes, I wasn't someone worth adjusting for. I wasn't someone to notice. Later that evening, after the dessert plates had been cleared, I stepped outside to the lodge's wraparound balcony. The snow had picked up, blanketing the pine trees and making the entire mountain feel hushed, reverent. The wind was sharp, cutting through my dress sleeves, but I didn't move. Behind me, I could hear them laughing, my family warm and golden through the windows, sipping wine and telling stories, their voices swelling like a familiar, tired chorus. And I wasn't in it. Not really. I pressed my palms against the railing, cold wood biting into my skin, and whispered to myself the words I hadn't dared say before. They don't see me. They never have. Not when I was 10 and brought home a perfect math score. Not when I was 17 and got a full scholarship. Not when I started my business, expanded it, protected it. Not when I offered them everything and asked for nothing. They only saw what was useful. And tonight, that was someone to get the napkins. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder I'd labeled Cedar Creek Transition, the internal code name for Alpine Creek inside my holding company. There it all was: purchase agreements, title transfers, renovation budgets, staff training protocols, and at the bottom the scheduled announcement: Saturday night, ownership summit, guest list confirmed. My name, bold and centered, Emily Warren, managing partner, Clear Pines Hospitality. I stared at it for a long time. Then I tapped the screen, locked the phone, and slid it back into my clutch. They could keep their illusions for 2 more days. Then I was taking the mask off. That night I couldn't sleep. The room I'd been given far from the main lodge was small but cozy. Pine walls, plaid throw blankets, a window that looked out over the snow-covered lake. It would have been peaceful if not for the ache in my jaw from clenching it all through dinner. I tried to distract myself, checked emails, scrolled news, read the same line of a book 5 times without absorbing any of it. Eventually, I gave up. I turned off the light, curled under the covers, and stared at the ceiling. The walls were thin. These older cabins had charm, but not much insulation. I could hear voices in the room next to mine. Claire's voice, bright and a little slurred from wine, followed by my mother's lower, measured tone. At first I tried not to listen, but then I heard my name. Claire laughed. "She's being kind of moody this trip, don't you think?" A pause. Then Mom's voice, soft but unmistakable. "She's harmless. Always has been. Sweet, of course. But she'll never really be one of us. You can just tell by the way she carries herself." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared up into the dark and let those words hit me like a wave of ice. She'll never really be one of us. After all the years, after all the holidays, after all the things I had done quietly without thanks or recognition, after all the forgiving and excusing and enduring, my mother still saw me as something separate, an outsider in my own bloodline, because of how I carried myself. I thought about every moment I'd second-guessed my outfits, every dinner I'd sat quietly through, every compliment I'd swallowed back to avoid sounding like I was trying too hard. I thought about the way I'd dimmed myself piece by piece just to fit, and still I was not enough. I rolled onto my side, pulled the blanket tighter around me, and let my eyes close, not to rest, but to hold everything in. I didn't cry. Not then. I'd already cried enough over this family, over this idea that if I just showed up right, they'd finally open the door all the way and let me in. But now I understood something I hadn't before. The door was never meant for me. They'd built a version of family that had room for tradition, legacy, and performance, but not for truth. Not for difference. Not for someone like me who didn't play by their rules, didn't crave their spotlight, didn't speak in polished sound bites. They didn't know me, because they didn't want to. That was the night something in me snapped, not loudly, not with drama, but like a rope stretched too far, finally giving way. Silent, clean, irreversible. It wasn't rage, it wasn't revenge, it was clarity. I opened my laptop and pulled up a contact I hadn't spoken to in months, a former colleague who now worked in hotel acquisitions. We'd traded a few emails in the fall when Alpine Creek quietly hit the market. At the time, I wasn't sure. The cost was high, the timing uncertain. But now I had all the certainty I needed. I typed, confirming I'm ready to proceed. Let's talk numbers first thing Monday. Then I hit send, closed the laptop, and exhaled. For the first time in years, the silence felt like mine. Not something imposed on me, but something I chose. Let them laugh in the next room. Let them build their stories around a woman they've never bothered to know. Let them keep calling me sweet, harmless, basic. In 6 months, I would own the ground they stood on, and they'd never even see it coming. Some people lash out when they're hurt. I've never been one of them. When I feel pain, I turn inward. I get quiet. I focus. I build. The morning after I heard my mother say I'd never truly belong, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't angry anymore. I was done trying to earn a seat at a table that had already decided I didn't deserve one. Done translating my silence into patience, my competence into compliance. Done minimizing myself so other people could feel bigger in my presence. I opened my laptop and began writing. Emails to lawyers, messages to my accountant, follow-ups to the contact I'd confirmed the night before, David Lynn, a hospitality specialist who handled discreet purchases for private clients. I attached proof of funds. I requested a call. I marked every message high priority. By 8:00 a.m., I'd sent 6 emails, signed 2 NDAs, and reviewed a summary of the resort's financials. They weren't great. The previous owners had coasted for too long, coasting on the resort's legacy clientele, the same families who had been coming here for decades, my family included. The books were tidy enough to avoid scandal, but sloppy enough to present opportunity. Deferred maintenance, outdated tech, inflated vendor contracts. David's message came in just after breakfast. You're right, this is a strategic play. If you move fast, you'll get it at 70% of what they're asking. Let me know if you want me to run point. I replied with one word, yes. Then I closed my laptop, got dressed, and walked to the main lodge for brunch with the rest of the Warrens, smiling as if nothing had changed. Because to them, nothing had. They were all there, Claire already mid-sentence about a potential speaking engagement, Mom, nodding dutifully, Aunt Ruth taking pictures of her mimosa for Facebook. They didn't notice I'd been gone for hours. They didn't notice I'd skipped the group hike. They didn't ask where I was or what I'd been doing. Of course they didn't. To them, I was just Emily, probably catching up on work, probably reading some article about train bridges or hotel architecture, whatever it was I did. I sat quietly, buttered my toast, and asked about everyone's plans for the day. I even offered to take a family photo on the deck after brunch. They handed me their phones without hesitation. As I stepped back to frame the shot, I realized they were all smiling in the same way, practiced, polished, full of themselves. It was perfect. Because they still thought they were in control. They didn't know the hold they had on me had already been broken. That I was no longer standing outside the family circle waiting to be let in. That I had built something bigger than they could imagine without their help, their encouragement, or their permission. And now I was about to own the place they worshipped as their private kingdom. I took the photo, handed back the phones, and walked away before anyone could ask me to join in. Later that afternoon, David called. I stepped outside to answer, pacing the back lawn in my snow boots coat zipped high against the cold. "Offer submitted," he said. They'll want confirmation by end of next week, but the seller seems motivated. You've got leverage. Keep it quiet, I told him. No names tied to me. LLC structure only. Of course, he said. And Emily? Yes. This is a power move. A smart one. I didn't say thank you. I just nodded to myself and hung up. By the time dinner rolled around, the contract was drafted, the holding company name was secured, and the deposit had been wired. Clear Pines Hospitality Group. My company, my control, my decision. I watched my family sip cocktails in the same lounge they'd raved about for years, complaining about the new staff, the weaker Wi-Fi, the lack of free upgrades. I listened without speaking. And I smiled. Because everything they loved about this place, it would soon belong to me. Something shifted after I signed the paperwork. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no sudden surge of triumph or explosion of pride. It was subtler than that. It felt like a slow, steady exhale after years of holding my breath. I didn't need to prove anything anymore, not to my family, not to Claire, not even to myself. I had done it quietly, methodically on my own terms, and no one in that lodge had the slightest idea. They were too busy discussing which cabins they preferred, too preoccupied with who had the best view of the lake, who knew the head chef by name, who used to get the family rate for booking early. They tossed around memories like currency claiming legacy, like it was something you inherited, not something you earned. And all the while I sat there sipping my tea, nodding along, listening. The irony wasn't lost on me. They thought they were guests of honor in someone else's world. They didn't realize they were living in mine. For the next few days, I kept my routine the same, attended family meals, offered to take group photos, asked polite questions I didn't care to know the answers to. I laughed at the appropriate moments. I handed out scarves someone had left in the cabin lobby. I helped my uncle figure out the espresso machine in the main dining hall. Claire teased me for still being the most organized of the bunch, and I just smiled. Let them say what they want. I didn't need their recognition anymore. I had already moved past them. What surprised me most wasn't how little they knew, but how little they asked. No one wondered where I'd been the day the deal closed. No one asked why I was always walking the property with a clipboard or spending evenings in the lodge office. No one noticed the resort manager started calling me Ms. Warren, with a tone just a little too formal for a guest. Ben, Claire's fiancé, was the only one who paused once as I was talking to a maintenance worker in the hallway. He tilted his head and asked, "Do you know the manager here? I've met him," I said simply. He nodded, satisfied. That was it. No follow-up, no curiosity, no real interest, just like always. It was a strange feeling, knowing I had all the power in the room and that no one realized the dynamic had flipped. But it wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It wasn't even about being seen. It was about seeing myself clearly, fully, for the first time in years. The girl who used to carry everyone's luggage, who filled in every gap without complaint, who translated her exhaustion into being thoughtful, she wasn't gone. But she wasn't running the show anymore. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who built something real, who didn't need to be loud to be undeniable. And that woman? She owned the table now. Not figuratively, literally. The oak dining table in the private event space, I'd approved the vendor that custom made it. The lighting above their heads, I signed off on the energy-efficient upgrade last fall. The property they kept calling a second home, I held the title. And still I stayed quiet. Because this wasn't the moment for announcements. It was the moment for observation. The final inhale before the storm clears. The eye of the needle where everything aligns, calm, certain, poised. They had no idea what was coming, and I wanted them to feel it. Not as a sudden shock, but as a dawning. A slow, impossible-to-deny shift in gravity. The kind that makes people question what they've missed, who they've underestimated, and what happens when the quiet one finally stops waiting to be noticed and starts taking the lead. By Saturday morning, everything was in place. The welcome brunch was scheduled for 10 a.m., the ownership summit set for that evening. The catering team had been briefed, the guest list finalized, the transition announcement, reviewed, polished, and waiting on a podium just steps away from the table where my family would be sitting. They had no idea. And honestly, that made it better. I walked into breakfast a little later than usual that day, coffee in hand, clipboard tucked under my arm, still wearing my wool coat. I'd just come from a walkthrough with the new operations manager, making sure the AV system was ready for the evening's formalities. When I stepped into the main dining hall, my family was already mid-complaint. "I'm telling you," Lauren said, flipping her hair as she buttered her toast, "the service here has seriously declined." "Like, do they even train the staff anymore, right?" added Haley. "The girl at check-in asked for my ID twice. I've been coming here since before she was born." Uncle Ron chimed in, waving a fork. "And don't get me started on the valet. Kid practically accused me of stealing my own car." Claire rolled her eyes dramatically. "It's just not the same anymore. The new management clearly has no idea how to handle legacy families. Everything's about rules now. No flexibility, no warmth." Mom nodded solemnly, as if she were mourning a loss. "It used to feel like a second home. Now it's just corporate." I stirred my coffee, letting the mug warm my hands. No one looked in my direction. No one connected the dots. "Did you hear a holding company bought the place?" Ben asked, scanning the room like he was sharing insider knowledge. "Some firm out of Portland, I think. No soul anymore, just policies. No soul anymore." I bit back a smile. The soulless company had overhauled outdated HVAC systems, introduced fair labor contracts, increased pay for housekeeping staff, and upgraded the filtration system for the lake cabins. I'd reviewed every line item myself. I'd made sure the values behind the operation aligned with mine. But to my family, that wasn't the kind of soul that mattered. They missed the version of the resort that bent over backward for them. The unspoken perks, the free wine, the reserved cabins, the familiar, comfortable sense that they were always the most important people in the room. That version was gone, and the new one didn't care about their last names. I took a seat quietly at the edge of the table. No one paused to greet me. I didn't expect them to. They were too busy reminiscing about how things used to be, completely unaware that the person responsible for the change was sitting 5 feet away, adding a touch of cinnamon to her coffee. They didn't know, not yet, but they would. Tonight. And when they did, it wouldn't just be about ownership. It would be about everything they'd missed while they were too busy looking past me. The looks would shift, the tone would change. Their memories of me would suddenly become more vivid, more detailed, rewritten in real time to fit their new understanding. And in that moment, when the truth finally settled into the room like snow on a quiet roof, they'd realize I wasn't the one who'd changed. I'd simply stopped hiding what had always been mine. The ownership summit was scheduled for 7 p.m. It wasn't some grand event with fanfare and champagne towers. Just a formal gathering in the lodge's event room, where the resort introduced seasonal updates and announced transitions in leadership. Legacy guests were invited out of courtesy, longtime families like mine, who liked to pretend their continued loyalty gave them decision-making power. No one ever paid much attention to it. This year would be different. By 6:30, the dining hall had been transformed, white linen tables, gold-trimmed menus, and a small wooden stage at the front. A podium, a branded screen behind it, a few tasteful floral arrangements. Just enough elegance to feel official. Just enough restraint to catch no one off guard until it was too late. My family filtered in fashionably overdressed. Claire wore emerald green. Mom went with deep burgundy, a family heirloom brooch pinned at her collarbone. She looked every bit the woman in control. They took their seats near the front. I lingered near the back wall behind the piano, just out of sight. Ethan, the resort's general manager, stepped up to the podium. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't need to. He had presence, the kind that silenced a room without ever raising his voice. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice smooth and clear. "Thank you for joining us for this year's Winter Summit. As many of you know, Alpine Creek has undergone a quiet but significant transition over the past few months." My mother sipped her wine. Claire leaned into Ben, whispering something. "We're pleased to officially announce that Alpine Creek is now under new ownership." That got their attention. Forks paused mid-air. A few heads turned. I saw Claire straighten in her seat. My uncle adjusted his glasses. My aunt sat up taller, as if suddenly remembering her posture mattered. Ethan continued calm as ever. The new majority stakeholder is a managing partner at Clear Pines Hospitality Group, the firm that acquired controlling interest earlier this year. They've been instrumental in modernizing operations, improving staff welfare, and reimagining the future of this property. A flicker of confusion passed across my mother's face. Claire frowned, whispering to Madison. Ben tilted his head as if trying to place the name. And tonight Ethan said we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the person behind this vision, the one responsible for every change, big and small, you've experienced this season. Please join me in recognizing. He paused, let it hang, then smiled. Emily Warren. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. For a full 2 seconds, the room stopped breathing. Claire blinked. Ben turned slowly in his seat. My mother's wine glass slipped just slightly in her grip, enough to spill a single drop onto the white tablecloth. I stepped forward from the shadows, heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Their eyes followed the sound before they even processed the sight. I walked calmly. No rush, no apology. I didn't look away. I walked straight toward the stage. Claire's jaw was slightly open. Ben looked stunned, like he'd missed something obvious, like he was trying to replay the last 10 years of our relationship and figure out where he'd gone blind. I reached the podium, nodded to Ethan, and took his place. The mic was warm from his hand, the room ice cold. I looked around at every face that had smiled politely while ignoring me, every relative who had dismissed me as helpful or organized or sweet. Then I smiled. Not to please them, to remind myself I didn't owe them anything. And I said, evenly clearly, "Thank you all for being here tonight. I hope your stay has been comfortable. If there's anything you'd like to share about your experience." I paused. "You can send it directly to me." The silence stretched so long I thought someone might faint. I let it breathe. 1 second. 2. 3. Behind me, the branded screen faded into a rotating slide deck images of the resort's recent upgrades, new policies, upcoming expansions. The audience didn't even notice. All eyes were still on me. I know some of you have had feedback. I continued, letting the edges of a smile curl just slightly at my lips. About the changes this season, the menu, the room assignments, the discount structure, the removal of certain legacy perks. I made eye contact with Uncle Ron, then Aunt Ruth, then finally my mother. No one moved. Those changes weren't accidents. They weren't oversights. They were decisions. Mine. I saw Claire shift in her seat, arms tightening across her chest, her jaw clenched. Ben looked lost. "Mom." She was frozen, like a statue carved in pride and pearl earrings. For the past 6 months, I've worked with an incredible team to bring this resort into a new chapter, one that prioritizes staff dignity, financial transparency, and long-term sustainability. I paused again. "My name is Emily Warren. I'm the managing partner of Clear Pines Hospitality, and for the first time in my life, I'm not the one being asked to step aside. I'm the one holding the door." A soft gasp from the back of the room. I could feel the air changing slowly, awkwardly, like a crowd realizing too late they've been clapping for the wrong person. I leaned just slightly into the microphone. "To those of you who've treated me like I didn't belong here, thank you. Truly. You reminded me why I had to build something of my own." No one said a word. Forks sat untouched, wine glasses half raised. Ben's cousin Marcus actually dropped his phone into his lap and didn't bother picking it up. I turned to the side, gestured to Ethan, and handed back the mic. Then I stepped down from the stage. My heels echoed on the hardwood floor like punctuation. I didn't stop at my family's table, didn't wait for applause, didn't look for approval. I walked toward the door, past rows of stunned faces, past relatives who used to speak about me in the third person, even when I was in the room. Let them feel it. Let them sit with the weight of what they'd never thought to ask, what they'd never bothered to imagine, that the quiet one, the helpful one, the reliable one, was actually the force behind the very thing they worshipped. No announcements, no revenge speeches, just truth, plain and undeniable. I reached the hallway, stopped, took one breath, and smiled, not for them, but for me. People always expect power to look loud, big, flashy, but real power, the kind you build brick by brick in the dark while no one's paying attention, it moves quietly, and when it arrives, it doesn't need permission. It doesn't need to explain itself. It simply stands in the light and lets everyone else catch up. I didn't go back to the table, didn't linger in the hallway, hoping someone would follow me. I walked straight out the side door of the lodge into the cold. The snow had started again, fine, almost weightless, swirling in the soft light spilling from the windows behind me. Everything was quiet outside, like the mountain had taken a breath and was holding it. I stood at the edge of the deck, my fingers curled over the railing, letting the silence soak in. Inside, they were still stunned. I could imagine it clearly, Claire's eyes darting around trying to regain control of the narrative. My mother straightening her blazer-like posture could erase what just happened, someone probably muttering, "Why didn't she say anything sooner?" That was the thing. I had. In 100 quiet ways, in every unspoken sacrifice, in every chore absorbed, in every boundary never enforced, in every moment I showed up when they never asked if I wanted to, they just never listened. And now it didn't matter. The truth wasn't up for debate anymore. I owned it literally and metaphorically, and I didn't need their validation to make it real. Behind me, through the windows, I caught a glimpse of Claire standing at the podium. For a moment, I wondered if she'd try to spin it, reclaim attention, pretend like she'd known all along. But even she looked a little shaken. Ben sat slouched in his chair, hands in his lap, face unreadable. I looked up at the sky, let the snow fall against my cheeks, cooling the last remnants of tension that had been living in my shoulders for years. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. This wasn't about victory. It was about liberation. For so long, I thought freedom would come from being accepted, being finally invited in. But real freedom came from realizing I didn't need the invitation. I had already built the house, and now I was the one deciding who got to stay. I pulled out my phone. One new message. From Ethan. Well played. I smiled, tucked the phone away. Footsteps crunched behind me a few minutes later. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I already knew who it was. Claire's voice was soft. "Emily, can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. The snow kept falling. Eventually, I turned my head just slightly, not enough to make it easy for her. "You said everything's changed," she added, "but I didn't know. None of us did." I looked at her then. Really looked. Her mascara had smudged just slightly at the corners. She was still in her designer heels, standing awkwardly on the snowy wood deck, arms wrapped tight around herself. "You didn't ask," I said simply. That was it. That was the truth. Not just about her, but about all of them. They didn't know because they never asked, because they never thought I could be the one to matter in that way. Claire didn't argue, didn't apologize either. She just stood there, snow catching in her hair, silence stretching between us. I didn't break it. I turned back toward the lake, let her decide whether she wanted to stand there in discomfort or walk away like she always had. She did neither. She stayed, and that told me more than any apology could. The next morning, I skipped the traditional family brunch. No announcements, no excuses. I just didn't show up. Let them wonder. Instead, I walked the grounds with Ethan clipboard in hand going over the lakefront upgrades, new dock installations, accessibility features, landscaping repairs. We discussed staff schedules and an upcoming wellness retreat planned for February. It felt good grounding, like I was finally putting my energy into something that gave back. As we walked past the cabins, I noticed guests smiling at me, staff nodding with recognition. It was subtle, respectful. They knew who I was now, and more importantly, they knew how I led. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with clarity, with precision. I'd spent too many years shrinking myself in rooms full of people who had no idea how much I was carrying. Now the balance had shifted. By noon, the first text came in. "Claire, hey, when you're free, can we talk?" I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, a knock at my cabin door. Ben. He looked unsure, like someone walking into a meeting without knowing the agenda. He had both hands in his coat pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched. Emily, he corrected himself. "Can we—" I mean, are you okay? I looked at him for a long second. He wasn't a bad man. That was what made it harder. He'd never insulted me, never raised his voice. He was polite, kind, even loyal in a passive sort of way. But he had also never once defended me, never asked the deeper questions, never seen past the version of me that was easy to manage. You never asked, I said softly. He blinked, asked what I do, why I work late, where I go when I travel, who I've become. He looked down, embarrassed. I thought I knew you. That's the problem, I said. You never tried to really know me. You assumed I was always the support beam, not the architect. He stepped back a little, like the words physically landed. I didn't mean to. I know I cut in gently, but meaning well doesn't undo the impact. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly the way people do when they realize something too late. I'm proud of you, he said eventually, even if I didn't say it before. I gave him a tight smile. You don't have to be. I didn't do this to prove anything. He left quietly. That afternoon, the calls started. Uncle Ron, Haley's mother, even Aunt Ruth, who hadn't texted me directly in years, sent a voice note laced with strategic sweetness. But it was my mother who surprised me. She didn't call. She showed up, unannounced, wearing pearls. She knocked once, then stepped into the entryway of my cabin as if it still belonged to her. Emily, she said, her voice measured. I think this has all gotten a bit dramatic, don't you? I didn't respond. She glanced around, taking in the clean lines of the room, the leather folder with resort documents open on the table. We're family, she continued. We can work something out. Woman to woman. Right? The way she said it made my skin crawl, as if this was a negotiation, as if I was still trying to get back into her good graces. She smiled sharp and rehearsed. I know we've had our differences, but you've made your point. There's no need to keep drawing lines, but I had already drawn them. In ink. Indeed. In the silence that followed a decade of being overlooked. I walked over to the drawer, pulled out a sealed envelope I'd prepared days earlier, and handed it to her. Inside, notarized statements from 3 former staff members, housekeepers, hosts, interns, all detailing instances of verbal abuse, all signed, all documented. One of them described her as a mouthy little thing in writing. I had already settled those cases quietly when I acquired the property. But now I was ready. If you ever attempt to frame this as anything but what it is, I said, my voice, even this becomes public. Her face drained. This isn't about threats, I added. It's about truth. She opened her mouth to say something, an apology, an excuse, a plea. I'll never know. Because I turned and walked out. For the first time in my life, I left her standing there. Not out of anger, but clarity. Some truths don't need volume. They just need timing. The night after my mother left my cabin tight-lipped and shaken, I sat at my desk with a cup of tea and reviewed the financial audit I had requested quietly weeks before the transition. It wasn't revenge. It was due diligence. Standard for any acquisition. But the results were anything but standard. Nestled inside the property's financial history under a series of vague expense reimbursements and contractor prepayments was a detail that turned my stomach. A renovation loan, issued 7 years ago, filed under the name Emily R. Warren, my name. The paperwork was sloppy, signed electronically by someone claiming to be me. The routing info matched a joint family account from years ago that I'd long forgotten existed. I hadn't approved it, hadn't seen a dime of it. But the signature was there. The funds were used, and the paper trail led directly to a kitchen remodeling project for the main cabin that my mother oversaw herself. At the time, I was still working 70-hour weeks, scraping together savings to buy my first small stake in a boutique hotel downtown. I remember getting a strange notification from the bank, something about a short-term line of credit being cleared. I thought it was a system error. I didn't question it. I should have. But back then, I trusted them. Now I saw it for what it was. Not a mistake. A choice. One I hadn't been aware of, one no one had told me about, one that left my name attached to a financial liability I never agreed to carry. And suddenly all those years of "you're so responsible and we trust your judgment" took on a different weight. They trusted I'd be too polite to look deeper, too loyal to push back, too invisible to matter. I emailed the legal team immediately, not to sue, not to confront, but to correct, to remove my name, to formalize ownership of that liability under the correct party, to protect the resort from any potential tax or reputational exposure. Then I drafted 3 short letters, one to the family accountant, one to the legacy leasing committee, and one to my mother. Each laid out the facts, dates, documents, discrepancies. No emotions, no opinions, just proof. The next day I forwarded them. By sunset, Lauren had texted me twice. The second message was longer, more desperate. "Emily, whatever you're thinking, it was a misunderstanding. Mom didn't mean to hurt you. Can we please just talk?" I didn't respond, because this wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about truth and accountability. And truth doesn't require a round-table discussion or a carefully worded apology. It requires action. That night, Ethan approached me in the staff lounge, his phone in hand. "We got a call," he said. "State Tax Board. Your cousin Lauren might be facing a formal audit." I nodded. "I didn't file anything," I said calmly. "I know," he replied, voice low. "But apparently she's been subleasing her family cabin through private listings for 3 summers, made over 40 grand, never reported a cent." Of course she hadn't. She thought the resort owed her. They all did. Their names, their history, their presence. That's what they thought gave them access. But those days were over. I'd reviewed every private use agreement, every legacy lease, every backdoor arrangement set up with a handshake and a wink. And now, one by one, I was cleaning house, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because I wasn't just a girl reclaiming her place in the family. I was a woman protecting an investment, a leader setting new standards, a name they'd used once to carry alone, now the name on the deed. Claire waited until sunset to knock on my door. She didn't bring wine, no forced smile, no pretense of casual. She just stood there in her coat holding a manila folder to her chest like it might shield her from the past. "5 minutes," she said softly. "Just 5. I let her in. She didn't sit. She paced once, then stopped by the fireplace, staring at the unlit logs, like they might offer her a way out of this conversation. "I wanted to explain," she began. "Don't," I said gently. She looked up, startled. "I mean it," I added. "You don't need to explain anything. We're past that." Claire bit her bottom lip the way she used to when we were kids and she got caught doing something wrong. Only this time there wasn't a parent to shield her, no one to deflect the blame. She placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were documents, leases, property usage reports, a letter of intent. She didn't speak as I flipped through the pages. At the top of the stack was her request to retain exclusive access to the cabin she'd inherited through a lease set up in her husband's name years ago. The same lease that had expired 18 months ago and been quietly extended through favors and assumptions. She had no legal claim, but she wanted consideration. "Mom said you'd be reasonable," she said, finally, voice quieter now. "That family should come first, that none of this has to get messy." I looked at her, really looked, at the sister who had once made me hide in our room while she hosted her friends because I was too weird. The woman who stood at a podium thanking everyone but me for planning our mother's retirement gala. The same sister who laughed when I was mistaken for resort staff and never corrected them. "Reasonable," I repeated. "That's what she said." Claire nodded. I slid the folder shut. "Okay," I said. "Let's be reasonable." Her eyes brightened just a little. "You can keep the cabin," I said, "but the lease will be updated, the rate adjusted to current market value and payment processed through the proper channels, same as every other guest." She blinked. "That's not Emily. That's not what I meant." "I know," I said, "but that's what I'm offering." She stepped back like I'd slapped her. "But it's me," she said. "We're not just guests. We're sisters." I nodded slowly. "We are," I agreed, "and that's exactly why I'm not giving you a pass." She didn't know what to do with that, not because it was cruel, but because it was new. For the first time in our lives, I wasn't playing the role she'd written for me. I wasn't smoothing things over or taking the smaller half or staying quiet for the sake of peace. I wasn't her shadow anymore, and she didn't know how to relate to me in the light. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, voice cracking. "I believe you," I replied, "but that doesn't change the outcome." She nodded slowly, and for once she didn't try to argue, didn't cry or plead or bargain. She just looked at me like she was finally seeing me not as an accessory to her story, but as a woman who'd built her own. After she left, I sat alone for a while watching the firelight flicker across the table. The manila folder sat there closed now, unnecessary, because the real boundary had already been drawn, not with leases or contracts or money, but with self-respect. I had spent a lifetime asking for space in a family that measured worth in charm and compliance, a lifetime trying to make myself palatable enough to keep. And now, finally, I'd stopped. No more negotiations, no more shrinking, no more sisters who took without asking. From now on, if you want something from me, you pay the same price as everyone else. Respect, honesty, and effort. Otherwise, you can book through guest services, just like everyone else. People think closure means hearing "I'm sorry," but sometimes closure is just silence, followed by peace. In the days after the reveal, texts continued to trickle in. Ben sent a message that simply said, "I'm still processing." Claire asked if we could start over. Even my mother called, leaving a voicemail that began with, "Sweetheart, let's not let this come between us." But nothing had come between us. We were never standing close enough for that to happen. That realization used to sting. Now it just is. I don't feel angry anymore. I'm not waiting for them to change or for their words to catch up to what I've already lived. I don't need them to apologize for misunderstanding me, because I no longer misunderstand myself. I used to think that if I just worked harder, gave more, stayed quiet longer, they'd finally let me in. But now I see that I was never meant to fit in their version of family. And that's okay. I've created my own version, one built not on expectations, but truth. One where I don't have to perform to be welcome, where I don't have to disappear to be loved. This resort, these grounds, this view of the lake in early morning light, it's not just a business, it's a reclamation. A quiet revolution that started inside me and took shape in brick and timber and contract signatures. It's proof that I don't need anyone's permission to belong, because I belong to myself. I don't want revenge, not anymore. That's too small for what I've built. What I want is peace. What I want is space for myself, for others who were told they were too quiet, too soft, too practical, too other to lead. This place is for them now, too. We're not invisible, we're just underestimated, until we aren't. The truth is, not all victories are loud. Some happen in quiet rooms over late-night emails and decisions no one claps for. Some victories are internal. Choosing peace over apology, clarity over chaos, choosing yourself after years of shrinking. I didn't get closure from an apology. I got it from power. Quiet earned undeniable power. And now I walk differently. Not because I'm trying to prove anything, but because I finally know who I am without their version of me. If you've ever felt unseen by your family, your partner, your community, know this. You're not invisible. You're just in the middle of your becoming. And maybe one day, like me, you'll stop asking for a seat at their table, because you'll realize you've owned the table all along. So here's my message to you, whoever you are. If you've ever been called too quiet, if you've ever been overlooked, ignored, erased, if you've ever stayed up late wondering when it would finally be your turn, build it anyway. Grow anyway, succeed anyway. Let them underestimate you, and then let them watch. If this story felt familiar, if it stirred something in you, tell me your story. Leave a comment, or share this with someone who needs to remember they're not alone. That being overlooked doesn't mean you're unworthy. That silence doesn't mean weakness. That power can be soft and still unshakable, because somewhere someone is listening, and maybe they're ready to rise too.